tiền hay nói để ra cho tôi ấy for
So we are starting tonight with the Way of Paradox as our launching point. Um, and so, it's one of those things, if you had a chance to read it, we'll get to questions and ponderings and your own sense of insights from it as we go along. What I'll first do is kind of give some of a summary um, as we get into this of the work and see where it goes and what it stimulates. So that's where we're going to try and work with this. So like I say, if you've read it, prepare yourself with your questions and all, and see if my summary little bit maybe starts to answer it first. But otherwise, that's where we'll get into discussion. I don't intend, like in the former ones, to spend all the time me talking. In that sense of that sense, where it's going to open it up more to a discussion of what we've read as well. Um, and so we are, as I say, going to be working on the Way of Paradox, which is the mystical life that Cyprian Smith has condensed the way of Meister Eckhart and what he's calling the Way of Paradox. Smith is very clear as he wrote the book that this is not intended to be a scholarly book researching like every thought and every line of the spiritual master of Meister Eckhart, but rather a book that will open us up, he says, to the depths of the spiritual life as it is exemplified and explained by a great mystic. That's the intent of the book. If this was a class on Meister Eckhart completely itself, that would be different, rather than a class really on Meister Eckhart opening up to us what we're calling a third way of the mystical life, the way of paradox versus the way of love and the way of mystery. And now we're into the way of paradox. So being that it's about entering into the deeper inner life, then we don't read the book, says Smith, solely to get information about Meister Eckhart, about his conceptions of the spiritual life, or we don't read it just as an intellectual pursuit, but as we've been kind of wanting, more a stimulation that will allow the inner life now to erupt and come alive. That's the purpose that Smith wrote the book about. Let Meister Eckhart bring us alive, taking us like we've wanted beneath the intellect into the actual experience and living of this. So Smith put it right in the beginning of his introduction on Roman numeral page 9. He wrote, "Since this spiritual teaching is so rich, many-sided, and paradoxical, a word of advice is perhaps needed to all those who read this book. If any readers start it and find they dislike it, then let them put it away and forget about it." Some good advice for most books. But if they do like it and want to go on, then they should read it slowly, carefully, and above all, read it right through to the end. Only in that way can they see it in proper perspective and understand how it all fits together. Now, this is actually good advice, not just for this book, but for the spiritual life in general. And especially if we're trying to understand mysticism. To jump around and cherry pick thoughts and sayings is what may have led to Meister Eckhart being seen by many as a heretic for many centuries. In other words, the problem was not with Meister Eckhart, but with his readers. By cherry picking his thoughts and sayings, they were the ones that entered then into error and misdirection. For Eckhart needs to be read in his context and in the wholeness of what he's saying.
Mm.
And so in the past century especially, Eckhart has been redeemed and no longer considered a heretic, but now is the true mystic that he was.
Mm.
Now, this tendency to cherry pick sayings and the readings that we do is a problem for many of us, because we end up picking out the sayings and directions that we appreciate and that fit into our own established conventions. But for the spiritual life to truly unfold and be guiding one to the fullness, to the perfection, to the wholeness, the healing that is meant to be in the spiritual life, it's meant to be trod systematically, if you will, without just jumping around. And so, even though Meister Eckhart didn't have this term, we would put it today this way. He would say, the spiritual life is not a cafeteria,
Mm.
though so many today treat it as such. Meaning, the spiritual, you can't just pick this from here and pick this from here and pick that. And I say, I like this about Meister Eckhart or any spiritual master, and I don't like that, so I'm going to leave that out. It's a tendency that we do today in our kind of dilettante way of being spiritual, rather than the disciplined saying that one must follow the path. Likewise, when we do that dilettante manner of it, we end up missing a lot of what is really going to be the power in it. And we see this, I mean, we see this today with many scriptures and the like. People will like, take for example, the 139th Psalm. People love parts of it. When you think, where can I go from thy presence, O Lord? Or where can I, flee from thy spirit? Basically nowhere. Know me and search me, O Lord. Beautiful statements, but they drop out a section right there, which is how I hate those who hate thee, O Lord. Oh no, that doesn't fit with my spirituality. So I'm going to drop those verses of the Psalm out.
Mm.
That's a spiritual cafeteria. And Cyprian Smith is saying here, both in the reading of this book, but especially in the approach to the way of paradox, don't skip around. Be disciplined. Otherwise, it's that danger we talked about many weeks ago of people that can enter into the danger of the spiritual life because they pick what they like, but then that only fits with what? The ego. The ego picks what it likes and drops out. It's like the person who says, I don't like that part of the 139th Psalm. Oh, well, okay, how come? It doesn't fit with my conception of God or being spiritual. Oh, your conception of God or being spiritual. And yet you're on the spiritual path to be transformed and learn of God. But I've already got my conception of God that everything has to fit into. And so it is we find the prideful, egotistical spiritual life that is of detriment to so many people, rather than let God transform your life.
Mm.
So it is that he says, essentially, you might find it disagreeable or even boring. If so, don't read my book and don't follow this path. But if you really find this attractive, then be disciplined. Smith ends his introductory part of the book alluding to one of the primary themes that we're going to find in Eckhart. And that is a vision of the spiritual life as a tension of opposites.
Mm.
His exposition of the spiritual life and the mystical life is a vision of the spiritual life as a tension of opposites. This is actually central to what we talk about as the way of paradox, then. a tension between opposites. We're so often trying to resolve tensions. We don't like things that don't seem to agree. And it was especially in the early church a problem because they really have this problem of a tension of opposites that we kind of now gloss over until we really think about it. How can Jesus be 100% human and 100% divine? That's 200%. That doesn't work in math, you know. And so we'd like him to be 50% each. No, it's 100%. Well, that doesn't work. You got to choose one or the other for 100%. A paradox, a tension of opposites. That's the tension of opposites that defines, if you will, Christianity. And when we try to resolve it, we end up, well, now we'd say with heresy, in that sense, but we end up with something that isn't true. Because we'd have to say 50%. No, that doesn't work. Well, then he's only divine and took on a body briefly. No, that doesn't work. Well, then he's just human who's kind of inspired. No. I always, that's how we try to resolve these things. And so it is that we don't resolve it, but actually say, I have to hold the tension and meditate on it. That's a part of this way of paradox. These things that seem not to fit are going to be the things that are basically our touchstones and our stimulus to go deeper into the spiritual life. Yeah, I just essentially signed a right there a meditation that could take you the rest of your lives. Meditate on the completeness of Jesus as both. That, and then with that, the thing that came out with, the sense of going, okay, as we move towards Holy Week, we look at Jesus in Gethsemane and go, if you didn't believe him as both, then you're going to miss the fact that there's a complete human will and a complete divine will in the incarnation that's struggling. Meditate on that. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're missing out on something. And that's what Eckhart was able to grab hold of. He didn't try and resolve it. He tried to essentially embrace it and see where it took him in that experience. The tension of opposites. Now, I put it in these grand spiritual and theological terms is kind of clear to us other places. It's like the cosmos always working towards equilibrium. Everything we know is in physics, chemistry, everything works towards equilibrium. And so the elemental world, we see that there's negative charges and positive charges, and they don't like being floating around like that. So they come together to create, if you will, a zero. If there's a +1 and a -1, they want to come together. If there's a +2 and a couple of -1s or something like that, they have to come together as three things to make an equilibrium. That's the basis of water. You get your +1 charge of hydrogen and your +2 charge, basically, of oxygen. And so you need two hydrogens to balance it out, and you get H2O. And they like being H2O. They don't want to be something other than that, that sense. That's the cosmos on the most basic elemental level. And this is the way God made the completeness from material to spiritual life. Everything is in a tension of opposites. Or, as I just put it with the elements there, we might call it a tension of complements. Things that complement each other in order to create a whole. There's the basis of sexuality, why Genesis starts with the tension of opposites. The tension of opposites of complements, really. Female and male complement each other to make a completeness. And there's the sense. And without that, there's a tension. And we go, which is right to be? Okay, women It's not right to be women. Men are the best, so all women become men. Well, no, that's not complimentary. Oh no, all men should become women. No, that doesn't work. Um, it's in the equilibrium of the two that we start to see the truth of the spiritual life. Yes.
So there's balance in the things that are opposite.
Yes.
Okay.
In the sense of what we're talking about, let's say male, female, hydrogen, oxygen, or any element, that's the basis of chemistry. It's the basis of physics. That things like just if you think about it, why do you put ice in water? To cool it. How does it do it? That really cold piece of ice in a lukewarm water. The two try to find an equilibrium, so it lowers the temperature of the water that it's been put into, while at the same time the ice is temperature is being raised until it finds an equilibrium there for a while. And so, and this always tries to find the equilibrium of the temperature and it's in. So if you have a glass of water in a 70-degree room, it will become 7 degrees after a while. That's why I call it complements at times. And so it's always trying to balance it out. And that again is, right now just the principle that that Smith is putting for us, saying if we have to get this principle down to understand where Eckhart will take us in this way of paradox, if you will. You know, that and actually, he'll quote other times, Smith will, and things, Jung, but he doesn't quote this, but one place Jung, because Jung was a great reader of Eckhart. That frankly, it's where some of Jung got in many ways of his ideas of the tensions of opposites in the psyche that need to be balanced out by reading Eckhart and others like that.
So I don't know if Eckhart came up with this, but God became man, so man can become God. Who came up with that?
That was
Right.
I think that was Irenaeus.
Oh, anyway.
It's Saint Irenaeus, like 100 in the second century AD. But yeah,
Eckhart really liked that. So does that fit that paradigm of
yes,
right? God and man are trying to find equal ground. Are you right?
in a or an equilibrium.
Yeah.
Because maybe if we said equal ground is how can humanity ever be equal with God, but
Well, he does say that. The common. Yeah.
But there's the sense is, and then we hit on this, I think, more when we talked about the way of mystery, but that idea is like, what is the purpose of humanity but to be the incarnation?
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
Who Jesus is what we were meant to be.
Yeah.
And Jesus fulfilled it, which is how, and there's that paradox in our lives. How can you be completely human and completely filled with the divine? It's paradoxical. Rather than, once again, if you miss this, then it's like, well, where does the Holy Spirit, take residence? In my pineal gland, or in the liver, or that was the ancient things. People thought the spirit was in these different glands at times and stuff. So where is the spirit? And what part, or even when we sometimes erroneously keep talking about what my gift of the Spirit is, as if I only have a part of the Holy Spirit. I often say that, that's like being partially pregnant. You can't just have part. So now our paradox is, how am I supposed to be this too? Now you've taken us to the end point as you're putting this, it's like, but I mean, when we go there, it is that we are working out the fact that we are, in that sense, the images of God, becoming the likeness of God, and yet we're not God. We're human and yet divine, which is why we talked in the way of mystery, the word to become deified or divinization or theosis, to become God, like, in a sense, as fully as a creation can. And you go, Let me see if I can figure that out. This is where the way of paradox helps. Good luck. It's a tension of opposites that means, by almost definition, it's beyond reason.
So this may be an attempt to do just what you said is beyond reason, but then the picture I get is that Jesus is the connection between the opposites for us.
Yeah. Well, that
Okay.
this is more of Jung on one of his things. I think it was in the transformation of the Mass. You know, he looks at the Roman Mass and life and stuff, and goes and says, you know, uses two images of that. Why a cross? Because a cross in itself is the resolution of opposites, which is, and that when you bring together the opposites, north and south are opposites, east and west are opposites or complements, and yet in the compass they are brought together. And so you can't just take one side or another. The cross was always a symbol of the combination of opposites or of complements, or even that another, and this is not just Jung, but some of the fathers, church fathers, which would be the symbolism of Jesus being crucified between two thieves, a good and a bad thief. And he is the resolution of the good and evil in a sense too, coming together with him between these two. So they saw this symbolism in the historical act of these things, of the cross and of the crucifixion between two thieves. And so, you know, in that sense, it is that balancing. And that Jesus, yes. And there's, again, the paradox, which then we can easily say it as a good theological statement. Well, Jesus is the resolution of that. And now you go, let me meditate on that paradox and really get to the depths, because it's so often we can, with like say, with simplicity, say, yeah, but now what does that mean? That's where this mystical life takes us. And as you start to really go, I have to struggle with that by sitting in the tension myself. And there's part of what we mean by suffering. You suffer when you sit within a tension rather than resolve it. We resolve tensions because it's more comfortable. You know, I sit in a tension and it's not comfortable, but I come up with stuff that's when transformation takes place in the midst of that discomfort, which we call suffering. That's the sense. And so it really is. I mean, and this is where we go when we grab hold of this principle that we have to have hold of. Then we see that life is not about getting rid of something, but of finding a correct harmony with it. And so it is that in the inner life, we're not trying to get rid of pride by repressing self-care or self-interest, but rather by combining self-care or self-love with an equivalent love of the other. Love others as you love yourself, Jesus said. It's a paradoxical statement. You know, we once again resolve it, don't we? Wait a minute. I don't really like that other person that much, so I'm going to love myself more than them. No, I'm going to be a really humble spiritual person. I'm not even going to think about myself. I'm only going to give that to the other. And it's like, and they can say I remember a story of a missionary that was always giving his shoes away. You know, anytime you see somebody without shoes, he'd take his shoes off and give it to them. And so somebody else would help, you know, missionary, here's some more shoes. And it's like, well, wait a minute, if that guy needed shoes, maybe you need shoes too. And it sounds really humble and really, really Christian to give his shoes away to everybody.
Irritating if you're the one who keeps supplying him with.
You know, wait a minute, what about the people having to give you shoes all the time? You know, did you really pray about it? Is that that balance then? And we go, wait a minute, it's so much easier just to give the shoes away and be poverty stricken and stuff and be a good person then, you know. But wait a minute, they're always having to go buy me shoes and give me shoes. Is this kind to that person? Or maybe they're starting to get irritated at it, you know. And how oh, I have to sit in that paradox and let then the spirit speak to me about what I need to do. Because I want to love that person unconditionally, and I want to have self-love at the same time. I need to find this balance. And so it is that we walked in the first steps of the way of paradox there, that it's a principle that we have to hold on to, that this is going to be the principle of the mystical life, if you will, of having to hold this tension of these different things. And so once again, we don't do spiritual surgery on ourselves as we're attempting to spiritually grow. Isn't that the common thing? Stop thinking that thought. Bad thought, bad thought. When will I ever get that bad thought out of my mind? Never. But you could take that bad thought and kind of all of a sudden realize, how does this fit in my life? And all of a sudden it transforms. Bad thought, it's all about me. Yeah, that's true. So I'm going to just surgery it out. Nothing's about me. It's about them only. And that might be a temporary technique, but in the long run, it's like, I'm going to have to get me back into it. Love others as you love yourself. I mean, it's kind of clear. And so it's like the paradox there that we're getting. So it's not spiritual surgery, getting rid of your bad parts. It's actually, how do you embrace them enough to let them transform? Once again, Jung, reading Eckhart, came up with this, and whether we attributed that to Eckhart or not, it's the idea of, can you own your own shadow? Was Jung's concept. That negative dark part of yourself, you can't get rid of it, and in owning it, don't then become it. This is the great mistake. People will say, well, this is just who I am. I mean, today we see it so clearly, which is this. What about the paradox, what I brought up between masculine and feminine? Well, I guess I feel like I'm a little bit gay today. Okay, I guess I should go act out on it. I'm going to embrace my shadow. No, I'm going to recognize my shadow, but my shadow doesn't get to run the story either. That's another one-sidedness. That would be the sense. Well, then I got to be totally against. No, don't even acknowledge it. No, I acknowledge it, but don't act out on it. And all of a sudden transformation can take place. But we tell people, embrace your shadow, embrace your dark, embrace whatever you feel. If you feel it, it's real, do it. No, there's the one-sidedness, which makes us a complete neurotic society, which now is bordered on a psychotic society.
So last Sunday I went up to get prayer, and something came up in my mind, so I repented of it. And it was pretty dark, but I felt good, and I feel like, yeah, I'm owning it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because when you repent, you're acknowledging it's not good, but at least, yeah, I'm owning it.
You own it.
Right.
So you've just gotten the principle you did of confession.
Right.
That's what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's the whole idea.
You bring God into it, right?
You do.
Yeah.
You bring it to God. We always say,
another person.
People will say, hand it over to God, but it's not handing it over like, well, that's gone. Bye. Never mind. It's like we're going to have to deal with this. Here it is, God. This is my darkness I bring to you. And yes, will I act out on it? No, but I'm going to deal with it, because I can't just kick it out of my life. It's not going to be kicked out. Frankly, I mean, that's where the 12 steps took hold of that principle. The 12 steps said, that's why people go, I am an alcoholic. Well, you haven't drunk in 20 years. I am an alcoholic because I still have the tendency. And yet, and that's, sometimes it could be taken as a negative confession but it's really, if you take it as shadow work, as darkness work, as confession, then it is, this still is there, God, help. And that's the first step. I confess it and say, I can't control it by myself. I need help. And so we go, okay. And which is why we say this way of paradox is the opposite of spiritual surgery, which is where we try and cut bad stuff out of our life and try and do an exorcism on our own soul. And yet, and find it always a failure, because in these terms we're using tonight, it's a way of paradox always. It's a tension of opposites. My shadow, which says, I want to do this. Most people's shadows are bad. For a psychopath, the shadow would be good, actually. It's just the dark, the side of you that's unlived. But most people, we call it the side of going, I want to do this thing, which is not really very good. And then I have another part of myself that goes, and in the tension of these things, and when I say part of myself, it's this. I think I would like to, go on and scream at this person. It's probably not now I'm getting to my inner dialogue. Probably, well, there's another part of me that says probably not a good idea. And so now I'm in a tension of compliments and opposites within me that I try and work out, rather than I need to get rid of. But why do I want to scream at that person? Well, maybe because they are doing something that's not nice. Well, do I have to scream? No, and I get to a transformed place. Something new comes about for me because of this tension.
Because instead of surgery, you're going to ask God to help deal with it. I mean, it's not going to go away. You can't fix it. God can, but you have to own it and bring it forth and sit and.
Yes, you have to, and because what you're doing is awaiting the tension. I've used this. Let me go back to the simplistic. I mean, I often use water because it's one of the simple, molecule there is, and so it's a good one. And if you ever want to kind of make water, you did these in chemistry and classes and stuff. You can actually get these gases and put them into a really sealed beaker, and then put them under a burner. Get them really going. Get it really going. Which is you heat it up to a high enough temperature where the molecules are bouncing around inside and they can't get away from each other. And boom, you see little drops in the inside of the beaker. It's cool. Yeah. And you go, what happened? Well, I held the tension long enough and kept it in tension until it transformed. Did I do anything to transform it? No. And that's why we say we leave this in the beaker, if you will, in the cauldron of the Holy Spirit. I hold this in the God, here it is. And as I hold it, because it's not a lot of times our shadow stuff's not very attractive. As I have to pay attention to it, hold it and oh no, it's there. It's suffering. And it's also suffering because I just want to be this other thing, or, well, maybe I'll just give in. And, it's like, no, the suffering of holding it to the tension until it transforms. And it will transform. Again, that's a principle that God embedded into the cosmos, from the most simple material and level, physical level, to the spiritual level. And Eckhart gets it at the spiritual level for us. We're talking tonight right there at that level, at the physical. This is on the spiritual level how these transformations take place.
So these transformations, these are bad habits or things we don't like in ourselves. And if we focus on them enough in the spiritual realm, they will eventually resolve.
Yes.
Are you saying?
Yes, and in this term that's often used as embracing, but not or owning, meaning I'm aware of it. I hold it in awareness. This is who I am, and it's not attractive. But I'm also not that too, because if I was it totally, I'd be acting out on it, and so, but rather than going, well, no, I'm a holy person. I mean, one of the best examples, and it may be kind of old and not totally accurate, but was good old Jimmy Swaggart, which is, I am a holy man, therefore I can't really want to watch women strip. So what's going on here?
Hmm.
And then it's finally, oh, they caught me with strippers, in motel rooms a couple of times. And it's like, I have sinned. I have sinned. But what happened to him is this: if he had acknowledged he liked to see naked women,
Hmm.
then he probably wouldn't have fallen into that.
Hmm.
But he held himself up as holy because he was this great evangelist, and denied and kept saying, no, that thought's gone. In the name of Jesus, be gone. It's a demon. No, it's not. It's you. It's, that's human. Human, that's the sense. Humans like sex. And so it's like, boom, that's it. Acknowledge it, and then it won't overwhelm you because you've got an eye on it. It's, in that principle, it's the principle of going on we talk about it on a spiritual level, that Satan only works well when said he's not existing.
Mhm.
When you see him, I mean, if you really saw him, you go, like when you seen that one, okay, I want to go see naked women. No, if it's demonic, and you actually open it up and you saw this demon with dripping fangs, and it's like, ugly and going, and he's going, and you hear him going, go see naked women. Oh no, listen to that, in that sense. Well, that's the sense of when we become, if we don't become aware of it, it's hidden to us and we fall into it.
Mhm.
Becoming aware is like seeing the dripping fangs. Oh, I want to do that. That is just really not an attractive identity for myself. Does that who I really, I'm some in seedy motel room having some prostitute stripping? This is who oh my goodness, what's wrong with me? Well, I guess it's human, but I'm not, no. And all of a sudden, if you do that long enough, the desire starts to wane. That's the transformation. And all of a sudden you go, it's not there anymore. Oh yeah, I remember when I wanted to see naked women in motel rooms. So yeah, that's weird. But it's not really that powerful anymore because I recognized it, stayed aware of it, which is the word owning it, and yet put it into the perspective of the paradox. Is that what I really want to be? And that changes. Now we're speaking about this on just this behavioral level of how it starts to change, which Eckhart doesn't talk about it this way at the moment, but it's the sense of going, this is like the purgative way. How you start to do stuff. We talked about these other ones. How you start to get the changes taking place in your life. Again, not by the surgery. When we talked about the purgative way of, you just need to be detached from your sexuality. Eckhart wouldn't say that, and that's why you'd say, no, you probably need to pay attention to it, and then don't let it control you.
Mm.
That's the difference. Be aware, and in awareness, it doesn't have to control you. And that's the sense. Well, just in a second, I guess, if we'll go back to this too, is that we go moving into the first chapter. We kind of just speaking there from the introduction, but the first chapter, Smith notices that Eckhart has come into vogue in the last century. And so he first poses the question, why? He states Protestants and Catholics, believers and unbelievers, Buddhists and Hindus, not to mention the great expert on human mind, the psychologist C.G. Jung, all have felt the magnetism of Eckhart and responded to it, each in his own way. There is something about him which appeals to modern people. There is something a widely felt need, which he seems able to answer. What is it? Smith puts forth. And that's when he comes to what we've been talking about. He goes, it's really about this way of paradox, because we are living, especially in our times, in a cosmos in so much disequilibrium. And so it is that we're finding in somebody like Eckhart in the last century a voice that says how we can deal with some things. I mean, we have watched a point to the point where our culture and society has disintegrated in many ways. And so we're so destabled. Smith believes that the basis for the resurgence of Eckhart's teaching is that it promotes an establishment of balance once again. Because in a time of growing disequilibrium, dissatisfaction, confusion, and conflict, where the old ways are passing away, he says, and no longer hold the necessary energy of fascination they once did. Certainly the white people don't go to church much. It's like the 19th century church is really passe for anybody in the 21st century. That sense, the old ways just don't hold their fascination anymore, and yet new ways have not yet emerged. He says, we live in the tension created by this dying and being born. And he puts it in this first chapter as really a fascination, therefore, with apocalypse, a sense of all things in turmoil awaiting a new birth. In his old film of The Power of Myth, when Bill Moyers interviewed Joseph Campbell, Moyers asked Campbell once what a society, a culture without a common myth looked like. What a society that was just in this kind of disequilibrium looked like. And Campbell's answer was, look at the newspaper. Violence, upheaval, lack of moral center, disintegration of society are all on display in our society because we're between an old way and a new. You want to say something, Cheryl?
I was going to say, look at what the newspapers like to report, because there's a lot of good stuff going on too that never seems to make the headlines.
No, that's true. Well, as they say, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
But it's also that it's not just
be unsettling to read that every morning.
It is,
yeah.
But it's also that it is actually, we are in a much more disrupted time. These things are increasing. It's like yesterday, or one the day before, I guess, whenever it was the shooting. There are more school shootings. There are more people doing these things. And even though there can be a good discussion along what type of guns should be in society, it's not guns. Because in China, it's machetes. In Africa, it's machetes. In China, it's machetes and knives. They have the same thing happening in many of these places. And so it's not the weapon, it's the world without boundary. It's the world that has mistaken license for freedom. And so we're just we're in a chaotic world. And that's where we say we've been in this shift for, possibly 100 years, but certainly very clearly for the last 70 years, since the 60s, we've seen this disequilibrium happening. And it's almost at the same time that Eckhart became very interesting to people as this, because he actually came up in the same type of period. What
periods in the world history, though, haven't been chaotic and violent within some societies? We just have become very good at creating new ways.
Yeah. Well, I think it is like right now. We are totally.
It was different from when I was a child.
Yes.
That way.
There's the United States and the West had a moral center for about 1,000 years.
Yes.
It does not have a moral center. And the violence has become more pronounced because of that. Now, if you're talking about wars, but the sense of people running around wantonly committing violence, taking 2 years
standards of behavior or values, even though you might not obey them. I do feel like we've lost.
It's a society. 2 years ago during the summer, when people were looting cities, killing people, doing all that, and it was kind of like a lot of people are going, well, this is what's going on. The other people going, this is good. We didn't have there's no moral center. There's not a moral outrage that this shouldn't happen. It's like, no, this should happen. And so, wait a minute. There's no moral, and we had a moral center, in that sense. So violence has always been there, but the upheaval it kind of goes like this, that type of thing. Like I say, back in the 14th century with Eckhart, it was much the same type of thing. He was on the edge of revolutions. and of all the changes that were taking place. I mean, the big revolution that would take place spiritually with the Reformation not long after that, you know, and yet the other revolutions within the places, and you know, so all of this stuff is this upheaval that we go, that it seems like he was actually having an answer to some degree on a spiritual level.
This is a little off center, but I wonder, it seems like in the history of mankind, we've always been seeking to dominate other societies. And even when the population of humans was very much lower, we still seem to seek each other out to destroy that tribe and take their land. I'm wondering if that is for resources.
Well, it's almost, yeah, there, but that is,
that's hard to
yeah,
understand.
but that, I'm going to say that this is a different reason. Like you just said, it's resources. You're going to be a good, and it was one of the places Marx was right. Everything is economic, you know. And why do you have politics? In order to support the economics. And why do you have military? To support the politicians that support the economics. And that's it. So everything is resources. Why do that's it. Why do you go to war? To get those resources. Why do you go invade another tribe? To get slaves from them for you? But that's a different thing, because you still had not a sense of disequilibrium. I mean, just think of it this way. Why did people go to war in World War II? There was a moral reason.
Yeah.
You had a reason. There was a sense like that. People had a reason. What's going today in our society? There is no standard. There's no standards. Unless you take the standard that we've actually moved back into a full paganism, which is really just about happened. It's a different standard. But we don't have a standard. I just used the example right now of the riots in Minnesota 2 years ago. And so we had leaders on one side saying put them in jail, and other leaders on the other side bailing everybody out of jail. Where's the standard?
And that's my home state, and believe me, it was not like that 60 years ago.
No. And so when we talk about the disequilibrium for the way of paradox, we're saying society is in a disequilibrium of those two sides. I mean, yes, we look at the politics of today and we go, we've got two completely different types of things. One, a Supreme Court judge can get up there and be faced and said, I don't know what a woman is. Okay, why? Well, because you've got a different foundational belief in life. Then other people go, how on earth could you not know what a woman is? Because that's from a different foundational belief. We have no moral center, no agreed upon consensus of what reality is. I'm using right now a lot of examples so present of transgender stuff. Where it is, I can define what I am. Wait a minute, but isn't there just different? And so without even trying to, I mean, right now, where I would stand on right and wrong with that. But without even saying that, it's going, we're in a disequilibrium. We're in a place of complete breakdown. And so what do we do? And so that's where Smith comes and goes, maybe that's why Eckhart, with his concept of how do we rise above this?
Yeah.
How do you get out of the who's right? This person or that person, this philosophy or that philosophy, this thing, who's right? And let's kill each other over it, which is on a physical level, surgery. I must kill you to get rid of you, or do we get the principle of rising above it in the way of paradox, which is the way of God? And that's when you'll hear me so often say, don't take a political side, take a Christian side. Listen to what God is saying. Can you rise above this rather than which one of these parties is most right? Now we're forced in voting to always think that out, but I'm going to say, as we think about stuff in life, we're taking the way of paradox and going, this is higher than that. Don't get stuck into the false arguments that are out there about your spiritual life, much less this political life that is out there. This is when and this is important because what we're talking about this is not off topic, because it's one of those places we see that why Eckhart again is important for answering this. He was a man of the world. He wasn't, as Smith will say, some misty-eyed, mystic in a cave or in some place like that. He had to become the prior of his order. He was a teacher. He was running things. He was in the middle of the world. And so it's like Smith will say, he's like really an example of contemplation in action. That this applies, this spiritual life like this applies not just to your inner life. It starts there, but applies then to how you interact in the world. It's not like we can separate the two. And that's where, once again, Eckhart can be an answer in many ways to people like that. They may be picking up almost unconsciously, because it's not a lot of people talk about that, going, "Oh, Meister Eckhart, he brings together the Republicans and the Democrats." It's like, no, it's a new thing that's being brought up. Yeah, it's like, and yet, again, say I'm going to point back to him. He goes, that this actually is. I mean, I'm looking at skipping over some of the things I just wrote down of his here, but this is important though, because he tells us, and this is on page 5 of the book, that one of the reasons that Christianity has actually taken a back seat in so many ways, a back seat to psychology and Eastern religion, is because it's failed to present this very balance that we're talking about. But that people are looking for essentially a knowledge of their inner depths and recesses, a looking into the heart. He goes, this knowledge and understanding of what human beings really are, what lies in the deeper levels of the human heart, ought to be found in the church, for it is religion, above all, which seeks to touch the central core of human nature. But people who turn to priests and spiritual directors for this kind of help are often disappointed. Because in the eyes of official religion, the human psyche, with all its hidden folds and dark declivities, has no real existence of its own. For the priest, the psyche or soul is just something to be fitted into a dogmatic and liturgical framework. This, however, does not satisfy the modern seeker, who wants above all to be understood for what he is, to be brought to the realization and acceptance of what really does lie in the innermost depths of the mind, regardless of whether this fits in with official church dogma or not. And this is where Smith will really promote Eckhart, because he says, because in the discovery of Eckhart's experience and teaching, we do not need to turn to a secular art such as psychology, nor to a different religious reality such as the East, but can find our net need in the Christian reality and its truth. It just hasn't been presented well. Pause here to make sure you get your other things in that you may have brought up too. Go ahead, Dibble.
It's not.
Well, that's what I'm pausing for. So, if you have things you wrote down, if you read this.
He says to read this book right straight through to the end.
Yes.
That would be a little hard for me. I've read about 3 chapters, but I need to take it very, very slowly.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of content there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What it means though is don't stop.
Or don't piecemeal it.
Yeah, don't piecemeal it. That's right. Don't skip to the chapter that's more interesting.
Oh,
I mean,
good.
it's like people always do this part, which is, Teresa of Avila is a good one on the interior castle. They skip the first chapters because they're boring. Let's get to the visions. Let's get to the levitations. Let's get to the how-do. It's like in the way of mystery. So how do I sit? Do I sit straight up? Do I kneel? I want to get, can I skip over that earlier chapters of stuff? It's boring. The theology, I just want to get to the experience. And he's going, no, again, because he doesn't put it this way so clearly in these, especially in the first chapters, but what you're doing is just tickling your own ego.
Yeah.
And that's it. Don't tickle your ego, but read slowly. That is the other side. Read it slowly. 3 chapters, good. Because we're not even at 3 chapters yet. So that's good. So, but it's the idea of, but don't come to a conclusion until you've got to the end. This is what Eckhart meant. No, I haven't gotten down the whole path yet.
I'm pretty
You know.
sure I get to the end. I'm still not going to be just say what Eckhart meant, but I'll keep doing it.
But so at least you've gotten to the end
Yeah.
when you're doing yes. No, but I think Smith would be commending you for going slowly. And but he's just saying don't draw a conclusion yet until you got into the end.
So I think it's in the first chapter, or maybe it's in the prologue, but he talks about Meister Eckhart, going from 0 to 60 and getting there as fast as he can versus
Right.
going this way in a circuitous kind of a way. So
Right.
I interpreted that maybe incorrectly to think that that's the only way we should do this, but it doesn't necessarily sound like that.
Well, that was Eckhart's way.
That was the way he seemed to go
Yeah.
about it, right?
Yes.
To get to God. But that doesn't mean everybody has to take that approach if we're going to move in this inner life, the
Right.
way he refers to knowledge, or how he refers to how to get to God.
Yes.
It sounds like the first way is pretty radical, or his way was pretty radical.
Yes.
Can you kind of address that somewhat, or is that not in the context?
Oh no, that is yes.
So I first read that, I went, "Oh, that sounds a little dangerous."
Yes. No, it's closer because he actually describes the 2 ways.
Right.
And so, but and we put these 2 ways as this. One way might be the way of love. See, we've already said there are different mystical paths to the center.
Mm-hmm.
And so one is more of a stepwise way that he talks about versus the direct. Now, the way of love might be more stepwise, we would say, which is go your purgative way, deal with these issues, do all of this. Eckhart is kind of closer, some ways, in a sense, to the mystery way, which is sit down and I'm going to ask you to do 10,000 Jesus prayers. Why? I want you just to focus on God. And so Eckhart's way, as Smith will put it, is first go straight to God, get centered in God, then go through the process of knowing your inner life. Because by centering yourself first on God, you probably have gotten a safety going there because it's centered on God. The other way is the way of self-knowledge that moves along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of come to the place of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's like this. That I'm going to.
But you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm reading, and this is from him.
I don't know where it is.
Well, it's actually on page 9 and 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No. Just reading. I'm looking to. I'm sorry that I just read it this way.
I don't know where
wait,
I saw it.
Yeah. Smith tells us that if we compare the spiritual journey to the ascent of a mountain,
Right.
the 2 paths appear in this way. The first is a winding path approaching the summit gradually, pausing at each stage. It is slow, but thorough. Now, this is what he would say is the path of psychoanalysis, nowadays, as well as the Ignatian exercises,
Okay.
more of that type of thing.
Mhm.
Or as he put it, Julian of Norwich puts this out, Henry of Suzo, he describes these to a degree that these are very many ways almost the path of love. That path that we put out of even in the sense of John of the Cross and Teresa, talking about stages that you go through and what you experience and deal with these stages as you're going through them. And as you're, so now if we took it to psychoanalysis, as he puts it, that it is, and that's where Jung kind of took off, not after Eckhart, but after these other things, which would be let's just explore you and keep knowing you deeper and deeper and deeper.
Mhm.
You know, that's the one way. That's the path of that way. It's also, as you say, the path really is taken by many Eastern religions, especially those that focus on the spiritual life, such as he quotes it as Tantric Buddhism, and many aspects of yoga, which are actually into the, developing your spiritual life along the way. The second path is not the winding way. He goes, the second is this: it assaults the summit directly, ascending the steep rock face without hesitation or delay. It goes straight to the heart, the deepest layer of the mind, the pure essence of consciousness, which is the image of God within us. So then he goes, first find and anchor oneself in the image of God, then encounter the inner life. It's on page 12.
Mhm.
Then, strengthened and enlightened by that, we can ascend slowly to the light, unlocking caverns and treasures on our way, if that seems right. But the first prerequisite is to find God in the deepest core of ourselves. And this is done by detachment, by letting go of all that is not God until a spark of awareness awakens in us, which Eckhart calls the birth of God in the soul. And this is where the way of paradox appears to combine the former ways. For in the way of mystery, in many ways, through detachment, we were going straight after God's heart, to the heart of God. But in the way of love, we were actually doing our self-exploration and knowing ourselves and bringing the fullness of ourselves to God. So it seems like, the way of paradox being what it is, it's kind of combining these things.
Mm.
Now, what is he meaning by this straight path? Like I just said, I would like you to just go home and practice this and get some beads, get Orthodox beads or get a rosary, and do 10 rounds on the rosary, just going, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Remember, we looked at the way of mystery, said that. What you do is you first breathe in, taking yourself into the very center, or I would say into yourself that's beyond yourself, into your true self, breathe into that, and then out of that true self go, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Breathe into the center. Breathe out, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And that was St. Simeon, the New Theologian's direction. Put your chin in your chest, look into the center of your being, breathe into the center of your being, and from the center of your being, speak the Jesus prayer. And he might say, do it 10,000 times, that in the way of the pilgrim of the whole book, that's what he's instructed to do. And as thoughts come up, don't be detached from the thought. All you're doing is focusing on that and speaking to Jesus. You're in your center, speak to Jesus. It's not a kind of a mantra that's going to take you out of yourself. You're focusing on the unseen Jesus. That's what we go back to our first talks, the will and the intellect. I know he's there even though I can't see him or feel him. And with my will, I reach out to him. And reach out with will and intellect. I know he's there. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And that is ascending it fast. Now you're just going straight to the top of the mountain without any exploration. If I was doing an Ignatian exercise or one of these others, I might be doing that, and all of a sudden a thought might come to me or an image. I might, Buddha have a dancing girls next to me or something like that, It's one of those things, that type of thing. Don't pay attention to them.
Something.
That type of thing. And it's like, or more mundane rather than wonderful, weird like that would be like, Lord Jesus Christ, I have to make a phone call. or something like that, or wonder if it's going to be raining on the way home. And it's like, and things, all this thought just came detached from it. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Oh, I just got this new insight into myself of my shadow. I'm going to own it. No. And then there'll come a time, he'll say, when you feel that connection with God, that the spark will be there, that you experience within your depths the presence of God. Now is the time when you start to explore yourself at the same time as doing this. That's the sense.
So accompanying that, if you were to go that route, would it be worthwhile after you decided, okay, I'm done with this for now, to kind of record like in a journal what you've experienced? You know what I'm saying? Well, say you spend 20 minutes doing what you're talking
Yeah.
about, and something came up that was important to you. Is it worth journaling over that to kind of track what things are going on?
Yeah, I'm going to say yes to you. Like, I mean, that's almost one of those things which is I can say with the distractions, like I need to make the phone call, and I'll make it after I'm finished praying.
No, that's what
You
I'm
know,
saying. That's
Yeah, that you put it down.
after the
But in the sense of what Meister Eckhart's getting at, that's more of an eclectic mode in that sense. We're going, no, you this, you may do this for 20 minutes, but he's going to say, really, you need to be doing this kind of pursuing the ascent of the mountain for good hours. Your prayer time is it. Your prayer time is doing that.
You just got the hiking boots on.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's the sense. And then, and you'll realize that these things, because you've done this in your everyday life, things start to come up. So you're not having to wait for your prayer time to journal. It's just a coming. It's like you're now living it so because it's now a part of your everyday life rather than this is a part of your life. And that's the difference. You hit the mountain, and then it's like this sense is, so you're going to go after it. And now watch what's going on the rest of your life. Now you become more aware, like these shadow issues.
Unceasing prayer.
What's that? It's unceasing prayer. Yes.
Right.
Because all of a sudden you're not sitting back going, okay, like an Ignatian exercise. I want you to go in and now, oh, I met my shadow there in the meditation. I meet my shadow when I'm walking down the street. I mean, my common joking, semi ridiculous statement always, which is always about flipping people the bird from your car. Well, I'm always bringing that one up because it's so common. And it's like, but you met your shadow. And you met it right there in the car. You didn't have to meditate to meet it. You just met a very crude part of yourself that is not very loving. And actually you let it act out maybe, but maybe you didn't. You go, I would love to have done that. Now I bring it into the paradox, but I didn't have to pray and meditate to find it. It's right there because I'm so aware because I've become so aware of God. And that's what he means by this ascent. Versus I'm becoming aware of it stepwise, and as the psychoanalysis or the spiritual direction that'd be more the stepwise, it would be like, well, how's your week been? Okay, any things come up for you like that? Well, yeah, any angers, you got your list of things like you come to confession. Yeah, well, I really did. I flipped this person off. Well, let's explore flipping them off and why you did this. Yeah, and is this who you really think you are? Blah, blah, blah. No, you'd work it through. This one is, oh my goodness, that's me. Is that really with God? Back into it. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon me. That type of thing. I bring this to, this would be the beginning of this. Now, I'm saying all this, and what I've just done is violated something. We haven't got to the end of the book. We've just gotten through first chapter. The next chapter is how you start to know some of these things, which is how do you open what can so often traditions called the wisdom eye, or Paul calls the eye of the heart. That's the next chapter, is opening the eye of the heart in order that we might be more aware of these things. But it's what's needed to be opened in order to pursue this thing up the mountaintop, so that you're not just sitting there rotely, Lord Jesus Christ, Lord Jesus Christ, Lord Jesus, boring yourself after about hoping that the beads get over with soon. but you really are, something's opening up so that you don't even know them after a while and they've dropped from your hand. That's the sense of what the next chapter gets at. And I'm violating, going ahead of ourselves to come to a conclusion. So your question is one that I'm going to say partially yes to, because I'm moving ahead. But now I'm going to say at this point in it, no. At this point in it, just try to open the eye of the heart in order to
Okay.
reach the mountaintop, and then get your sense of who I am in God, that I am the image of God established. And now you're going to be knowing everything in the light of God that's going on inside you. That's what
Doesn't
that
he
card
say,
gets at.
I can't remember, doesn't he say that God will meet us there
Yes,
kind of early on in the book? I
he
think.
does. That's what God. So that's it. We're open doing these things, but like so many things, we become actively receptive. That's our term from before. This is making ourselves actively receptive
To God.
that God will come and meet us. God is the bridegroom, in this other language, our other language, the language of love. God's the bridegroom that comes riding for us. The bridegroom comes to gather the bride. The bride does not go and propose to the bridegroom. This is this type of thing. And so in especially in Jewish things, it's like the bride's hanging around. That's the story of the virgins. They're all waiting around for the bridegroom, and they don't know when he's going to show up, because the bridegroom and the brides and his men are out partying until they decide to come up the street with the tambourines and everything like that. The bridegroom's coming. We've run out of oil. Tough luck. But it's that sense. But it's that sense. So it's active receptiveness, and then God comes to meet you, and that's it. But that's again one step ahead of ourselves. Right now, we're kind of established tonight the paradox and the tension of opposites and the opening of oneself to the resolving of them only in transformation. Because I keep doing that little sign, which is really, it's a triangle. Two things that seem opposite. How do they resolve? You don't bring them together in that sense to find a common ground. That is like ice and water. Now neither of them. Now both are lukewarm. They transcend, and that's the sense. There's a new thing. If hydrogen and oxygen do this, boop 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 boop, they stay gases, and nothing's really going on. But when you let the tension be there, they transcend to become something brand new. And that's why I keep going with this sign. This is what we're doing with that. We're trying to get something transformed, transcendent, and that's it.
So
Transfigured.
we want to be transformed
Yeah.
through this process of
Yes.
meditation and deeper spirituality. We want
That's
to be
right.
transformed
Yeah.
closer to God, are you saying?
You're transformed from the image of God in which you're made in a potential into the likeness of God. You become another incarnation like Christ. And that's where we go. That sounds like, It's like, but that is exactly what you are.
So
When you're baptized, you come up out of the waters and you're told that you are a little Christ. You're now in the person of Christ. You're in persona Christi is the language in Latin. And so you are one. And we go, you got to be kidding me. I'm the same person. I'm just wet. And it's like, no, you're not. You have been made a new being that you're trying to now manifest, that you're trying to live into. And that's the sense of and this spiritual life is bringing you from that potential into who you are.
so the hard part is finding a crucible for the contain. You talk about suffering. Suffering is like the crucible,
Yes.
or is it faith? I mean, do you just believe that you have to endure stuff because
Well, I
God,
mean, it's like
it's God's will,
I think just life is the crucible.
Yeah.
I mean, just living. I mean, that's why you don't have to go out and get a hair shirt and whip yourself, because life is bad enough. And so if you're paying attention, then it is suffering. because it's like until the transformation takes place of that issue, only to open up to a new one. You know, we don't, you know, I would say until the resurrection of the flesh and the coming of the new kingdom, we're always struggling with this new things that are always growing in us. So life is the crucible, and it's our awareness. And so, frankly, the meditative life is a practice of being more aware.
Yeah.
Is really, and you're being more aware because really our real life starts with what we call the inner life, which becomes manifested in what we think is real, is this minuscule outer life.
Mm-hmm.
So I go into to recognize the true life, center myself in there, and then I'm aware. And if I'm aware of the true life inside, it's like it makes this life sometimes really tough.
Hmm.
The more you're aware of God, the more miserable it is to live in this world.
Hmm.
I mean, it's like,
Paradox.
it is. It's painful. It's painful to see the darkness. It's, you know, it's actually why at the end of his book, Billy Graham says it's a grace of God that our eyes are closed, because most people couldn't handle the fact of seeing all the demons and the darkness that's around them. And so it is that we keep our eyes closed, but we're not supposed to. We're supposed to get to the point of strengthening ourselves enough that we can see the darkness and still live in it. But it is the pain of that Jesus went through when Jesus had to look and say, all these people are living in darkness. Forgive them, Lord, for they don't know what they do. They're really stupid. So yeah, stupid. It's like, but that the closer we get to God, the more that is a pain for us, which is one of the reasons unconsciously people avoid spiritual life. The spiritual life is painful because you become awakened, and it's not a good thing to see often. And that's when you can say, like early Christians, Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus, let's get this over with. Because this is not a good scene. With that, we'll go to chapter 2 next week.
I was driving on the freeway